Agenda today with quite a few updates on strategic planning and other issues we all care about. So I'm going to, while I'm opening up my computer, just have the clerk go ahead and call the roll and we'll get started.
Bajent.
Here.
Clegg. Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez. Thompson.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. Okay, first up, Courtney. We've got Courtney Washburn to go through some strategic initiative planning updates. And this is a great time too, if in this there are particular topics you'd like deeper review of, we can let us know. We'll make sure to schedule those out. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name is Courtney Washburn. I'm the Chief of Staff for the City of Boise. And I'm before you today to talk through some strategic initiatives. A couple caveats. One is this isn't all of the strategic initiatives. 2, I'm presenting the work of others. So please know I am not doing all this work on my own. It's the fine staff of the City of Boise. And 3, to the mayor's point, I'd like to know at the end of this what questions you have, and then if you'd like further discussion of any of these topics in the future, just let me know. So today we have housing, economic development, transportation, and climate. And one thing I wanted to mention about the 4 of these initiatives is that we're using a cohesive strategy to kind of bring all 4 of these together. One is to maximize our resources. The city alone can't solve some of these challenges, so we need to convene and coordinate and seek additional funding and action from a variety of partners. We also need to take advantage of the opportunity to address multiple issues at one time. In my mind, the best example of that is an affordable housing development powered by clean electric energy on a major transit line that provides workforce that's needed in the economy. And then also we need to create solutions informed by consistent and inclusive community engagement. And lastly, we need to measure and report on what's working and what isn't. You all have supported some new tools within the City of Boise, and we're really trying to do a good job of defining the impact of those tools, tweaking them if they're not doing what you expect them to do, and really monitoring and tracking the impact we're hoping to have. So on housing, we lead a public-private partnership to end homelessness in Ada County. You have a presentation later in this work session that goes into detail on this. Also, our goal is to increase permanent supportive housing units that offer healthcare, mental health counseling, and substance abuse treatment. A good example of the most recent permanent supportive housing is Valor Point on State Street, and preserve and increase affordable housing stock by testing new tools that incentivize developers and property owners. And then lastly, we need to continue to build relationships with housing industry partners to identify the barriers and innovations we might find to increase affordable housing. The progress to date: you launched an eviction prevention fund in partnership with Our Path Home, awarded Jesse Tree $150,000 for eviction prevention, and you continue to fund a homeless prevention case manager focused on Boise. Also developed a land trust to ensure housing options are available. The property has been acquired at Franklin and Orchard, also State and Arthur, and we have 2 other projects in negotiation. You approved the demolition delay ordinance, which hopefully will help us preserve some existing affordable housing. And then the creation of a housing bonus ordinance will incentivize the development of affordable housing. I think the first use of that ordinance is currently in the works. And then, as you all know, the efforts to rewrite the city's zoning code is underway to ensure new development aligns with the city's values. The next steps, and again, these don't include all the next steps. These are just the ones I wanted to highlight. You have a request later in your work session agenda to expand the Housing and Community Development team by 3 positions. We're also working with a consultant to get a much better understanding of the housing needs in the community and also the income levels associated with those housing needs. And then we'll apply that data to set targets for both supportive housing and affordable housing, and then also to develop or further refine tools to get the outcomes we're looking for in those areas. And that is what I've got on housing. On economic development, invest in partnerships and programs to support recovery and build economic resilience. This was further highlighted with the COVID pandemic and the need for us to dedicate some resources in understanding recovery and resilience. Also, to partner with the community to address critical workforce needs that include early education, housing, and childcare. We need to continue to attract employers that reflect Boise's character and complement our existing businesses that support potential employees and foster informed partnerships to enhance the city's business climate, and then foster entrepreneurship by facilitating access. The progress, you approved the launch of a small business program to support local businesses and organizations during the pandemic. We really expect to be able to continue that program with the new recovery funds made available. Developed Boise on the Block program, allowing businesses to operate safely while expanding onto sidewalks. I expect to see more of that as the weather warms up. Also, we increased staffing to build our capacity and advance our capability in business attraction, retention, and expansion. And then we launched a child care task force to create recommendations. Child care in particular, in regards to COVID, I think highlighted an ongoing challenge that we had in the city even before the pandemic. So the task force will issue recommendations that the city can then act on. The next steps are to create a course of action with the strategic plan. The strategic plan has been underway for several months. It should come back before you in June 2021 with metrics for numbers and the types of businesses attracted. And then we want to collaborate with partners for development to increase housing stock and make it easier for residents to bus, bike, and work. That's another example of where these initiatives are not standalone. They interact with each other in different ways. And then create an action plan to launch a climate incubator. On transportation, partnering with Valley Regional Transit and Ada County Highway District to make it easier for our residents to bus, bike, and walk. Leveraging canals as bike and pedestrian pathways, and exploring and investing in innovative city approaches to move our residents from their homes. Our progress, in partnership with Valley Regional Transit, we added 24 hours of expanded bus service on nights and weekends on select routes, and added 8 new electric buses to the transportation network. And we collaborated with partner agencies to add and develop new bike lanes. Next steps, the adoption of a pathways master plan identifying over 80 miles of potential canal pathways by the summer. Bree comes before you later to do a bit more of an update on the implementation of a Vision Zero policy and the associated task force. On climate, the goals are 100% clean energy by 2035 for the community, and the city goal is 100% clean by 2030. Establish climate action goals for our community and operations. We're excited to bring those to you in June. And those goals should identify reductions to greenhouse gas emissions to achieve carbon neutrality while enhancing the community's resilience and adaptation to the impacts. Our progress, as you know, we created a climate action division to ensure a singular focus on this issue. We did that utilizing existing staff and funding. We adopted energy codes that require electric vehicle charging infrastructure in new residences. We significantly increased geothermal water rights to build capacity in the system. And then you approved an interim budget change earlier this year that will fast forward our efforts to replace our motor pool vehicles to electric. And 8 new vehicles should arrive this summer. The next steps, I'm sorry, this is so wordy. That's what you get when you make a climate division. So we are going to release Boise's first climate action roadmap to establish some of the goals I've already mentioned. That will be in the spring of this year. We will continue to implement Boise's energy future to achieve the clean energy goals. That largely will depend on the development of a thermal energy plan, in addition to our transition for natural gas and the geothermal system. We hope to bring that information to you in the fall. And then develop a process to electrify our buildings with retrofits, repairs, or maintenance in the fall as well. And then we're going to continue to explore partnerships with entities like the Idaho National Laboratory to identify potential research and innovative opportunities. And that is what I have for you today. And again, I'd stand for questions. If I don't know the answer, I will find them. And I'm also interested if I mentioned anything that you would like to see a deeper dive on, or if there's just another topic that's brought up that you would like to be presented with more information on.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, we'll go with Council President and then Councilmember Woodings.
Thank you. Thank you for the overview, Courtney. It's good to be reminded of all the things that we are doing already. It's a lot, and really appreciate it. I have a couple of comments just in each section. On the housing, I think we'll talk about that later, but I hope we can explore a way for the City Council to really do a deep dive into the strategy and see what more we can do. So I think there probably is more to do there. On economic development, you didn't mention the industrial park, but it really is at a point where I think it's going to really bear some big dividends to us. We've got about 500,000 square feet of new industrial development underway and another 1 million square feet under proposal. And those are going to be jobs that we desperately need because they're better paying jobs. But that ties into the next two, which is we need to make sure that the transportation and housing are such that they can serve that area well. And we've got time to do it, but I think it's time to start talking about it now, if that makes sense. And then finally, in the climate action, again, transportation, I think, is something that we should really think about as one of our climate goals. I think there are ways, I know that we've done the EV, but beyond EV, there's other transportation things that would be helpful. And then just sort of self-interested one, don't forget the City of Trees Challenge is actually one of our climate goals as well in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Woodings.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Courtney, I just had a couple of questions under the economic development heading there. You did talk a little bit about attracting businesses, and I was wondering if growing our own businesses and helping Boiseans with growing their own businesses is also part of that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, yes. The good news is the strategic plan is comprehensive and will include, this is my jargon, not theirs, the biggest bang for the buck when it comes to economic development. So with the resources the city has, how best to both retain the businesses we have and attract new ones.
Great, Thank you. And then my next question was about the child care task force. I remember that budget, the budget allocation, but I haven't heard much about it since. Was that just an internal child care task force to explore child care for city employees, or was that more of a citywide task force?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Whittings, we have both. So we have an internal child care task force to help our workforce address their child care needs. You approved a study of a potential city-supported facility that did get a bit waylaid by the pandemic. It was just not a great time to launch a look at childcare, but we will be conducting that. I think we were looking at starting again in the summer. The Child Care Task Force is also the external facing one with people who represent the larger child care facilities to the smaller ones to get a better idea of how the city can facilitate childcare for the community beyond our own staff.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And just kind of on a macro scale, I enjoyed having an update. I feel like, I don't know if it's just me, but I felt super, super disengaged and not really knowing what's going on. And so now I feel a little bit more connected and I appreciate it.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, was that
Thank you.
Councilmember Sanchez?
Yes.
Great, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And my apologies, I came from another Teams meeting that just ended. So thank you for waiting for me, guys. So Courtney, I apologize if I missed it, but I'm wondering if there's anything we have planned for reaching out to, let's say those businesses, those folks who come from underrepresented populations, and doing any sort of initiatives to help them find their spot in our city. I myself have been contacted by folks who are interested in that, and Sean Keithley was kind enough to meet with me and folks over Zoom. And so and that was their question. Do we have anything planned in the city of Boise to help those folks get a good foot going here in Boise? I know that one of the things that was shared with the gentleman that we spoke with was a difficulty in getting support from banks. And they did allude to the possibility of discrimination. And so that's something that if we haven't already considered, that we may want to consider.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, I'll just add one thing. When we come back to you for the expenditure of the new COVID recovery funds, we plan to continue our outreach to those businesses to get the money to the folks who need it most in the short term. And then I'll follow up with you on the answer to the long-term strategies.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate that.
And I'll just interject here too, as the new funding comes, we don't yet have guidance from Treasury on how it can be spent, but we want to take what we learned from the last small business loan program and do better if we're able to do the program again. And in thinking about minority-owned businesses, but also potentially like breaking it into buckets so that we can make sure that we are able to make clear that we're supporting businesses in all different sectors, whether it be the arts, minority-owned, small businesses, et cetera. So there's a lot of work to be done on developing something like that once we know if we can, and then how much we would have to do it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just to be clear, the folks that reached out they're talking about bringing new business to Boise, and they just happen to be folks from underrepresented populations. So thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Also, second what Council President Clegg brought up earlier, it's great to see all the progress that's been made and the steps. And I think it's pretty impressive with all that's been going on, that so much has been done. And it's great to see some of the next steps ahead. I know we're getting a Vision Zero presentation here pretty soon. I had the opportunity to talk with Bree a little bit earlier today and Deanna. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about canal pathways in the near future. And it sounds like that's on the radar. A couple of things I wanted to bring up related to the economic development, the businesses, and I brought this up with Council President. I'd love to just make sure that it's on the record, is that if more funding does come available for small business grants, I would love for us to be able to take a look at the existing list of businesses who've applied, who maybe didn't make that first cut, but already have stuff on record, as well as maybe some businesses who made some small clerical errors that maybe made it so that they weren't able to get those funds. I think some of them, there may be a chance, spent funds thinking that they were going to get relief and then didn't. And so if we could just prioritize taking a look at that and examining it, I think that would be wonderful. And then my last thing, and I know that Courtney, you already brought up that there's so many initiatives going on. This can't quite possibly cover everything in this little bit of time. But I know that we started some work last year with DEI training in the Dignitas agency, and I haven't heard anything for a little while about that one. And since it intersects with so much of the other things that we do, I would love at some point just to kind of get an update and touch base on where we're at there and kind of the efforts along those lines. But thank you for the presentation. It's exciting to see all this stuff.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, you will get a presentation regarding the DEI initiative soon. We're waiting to wrap up the first phase of that work so we can present to you what we learned, what we know now, where we'd like to go. So just know that. And then also, I hear you on prioritizing on the small business loans, the folks that have already submitted applications, and that's our intent. We're just waiting on Treasury's guidance, so we're sure we can do what we want to do.
And we think, am I right? We think that that'll be in 3 or so weeks would be the soonest that we would get the guidance. And then we'll have more clarity and opportunity for staff to start thinking about how we use that guidance to build out programs. And then we'll come back to you all with information and for feedback. Is that it? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next up, we're going to jump right into the Vision Zero introduction. And this is, if I remember correctly, this is the first time that we've discussed as a council Vision Zero. So I think some of this is going to be this is what Vision Zero is about. And then, of course, on either side of me, we have 2 leaders in the Vision Zero movement here locally that will be involved in this. And so Bree is here as the transportation policy person for the city to talk a little bit about it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, members of council, I'm here to give you the introduction for Vision Zero and tell you a little bit more about where we've seen it in some of our previous plans, where it exists nationally, and some next steps that we can take to implement it as a city. So first, what is Vision Zero? It is a multidisciplinary approach to end traffic-related fatalities and serious injury, and it does so by combining principles of engineering design, safety enforcement, and education aimed at all road users to ensure a safe space for everyone using the road. It is not business as usual. It is a real systemic change, and it goes down to even redefining traditional language used to discuss traffic crashes. There's an emphasis on calling them crashes because they're not necessarily accidents. They are preventable, and you can institute systemic change to make this prevention possible. So a couple things here on this one. And I think Council President might have some things she wants to add as well, because as we know, we have a couple advocates in the room for this. So 2 common examples that you might have seen before that are examples of how road design and enforcement can compensate for where humans might fail. If you think about a long stretch of interstate highways where you have drivers who get sleepy or get distracted on the side of the road, or sometimes in the center line, you'll get a bumpy strip of asphalt, a rumble strip, and that wakes the driver up and alerts them that they're veering off their lane. So that is a common example where we know there's human failure that exists, and road design has been able to compensate for that a little bit. Another example would be right on red policies or no right on red policies. So you think about a driver approaching an intersection and they're preparing to turn right at a red light, and they might look left to see if there are any cars coming to see if they can go, but they might totally miss a pedestrian or cyclist in the intersection because they're not looking there. And thinking about where we've seen Vision Zero policies before, our Transportation Action Plan that we released in 2016 had Vision Zero identified as a way we could achieve safety for all. It was adopting a Vision Zero framework was one of 8 program-based steps that was recommended we could take to help create safer roads. Adopting a Vision Zero policy was also a recommendation to improve our bicycle-friendly city status. And this is along the lines of what Courtney mentioned earlier. We don't do anything by ourselves, and we have a huge role in supporting our transportation partners and their efforts to work toward these things. And we have a couple here locally that have begun similar efforts in the name of Vision Zero, including ITD, Compass, ACHD, and there's a real database component to this that I think we have a space to support through a task force. Across the country, you can see on this map, there are quite a few cities that have taken to adopting Vision Zero policies, and some of the common themes that arise from these other cities are how they implement this. They have steering committees, task forces, work groups that guide the effort, and in the multidisciplinary nature of Vision Zero, you'll see not just the cities, but they'll get public health officials involved, they'll get universities, researchers involved to bring all those different approaches together to achieve 0 deaths and injury on our streets or on the streets. They'll also have an action plan that breaks out some short and long-term goals, similar with some of the things we identified in our TAP in 2016. There are some really quick wins we can do around building up our data capacity, but then longer-term advocacy for intersection improvements and things like that. Another fun thing a lot of these places do is have a safety pledge for businesses and residents to encourage all road users to really know the rules of the road and how to interact with each other in the space. Where are we now? If you look at the map over here, you can see this was from TAP in 2016, but half of Boise's bicycle and pedestrian collisions occur on a quarter of our street network. So there are some high injury locations that exist here in Boise today for cyclists. But ITD reports from their crash data, there were 12 fatal crashes on Boise streets in 2019 and 125 serious injuries. So in the next couple slides, talking about our approach and next steps we could take. In this slide here, focusing on a task force, building a diverse group of stakeholders that includes transportation professionals, health professionals, research, community members, and more, so that we really have an idea of how we can incorporate all of these uses to enhance that systemic change that we'd be looking for to drive towards 0 death and injury. We develop leadership, collaboration, and accountability, and be a real partner in collecting and analyzing data for those other transportation partners also sharing these goals with us. So next steps would be staff bringing forward a formal policy adoption to acknowledge that we want to take on this effort, and then establishing that task force of key internal and external stakeholders. At this time, I stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Bree. Everyone, I hope this is a good introduction to you about the difference between Vision Zero and some of the other things we've already begun doing. Just to reiterate that, I think, Bree, if you could go back to that map that shows where all the injuries are. A Vision Zero approach, rather than looking at a specific location where there might be an injury or a fatality, looks at that crash and analyzes why it happened, and then looks across the system and says, where else would that kind of a crash be likely to happen? Where else do we have those same characteristics and that same design? And rather than fixing that one location where the crash occurred, figures out a strategy to look at all of the locations across the system and make all of them safe. And as Bree said, it's not an approach that assumes that you're going to prevent all crashes. The approach is designed to prevent serious injury and death when a crash occurs, recognizing that we're all human, we all make human mistakes. You can't design mistakes out of the system, but you can design the system so that when those mistakes are bad or happen, they're less serious and that fatality or injury doesn't happen. So we've already got a good start with our complete streets policies and some of our other things. This just takes it a step further, and I hope that all of you will be supportive of it. I certainly am.
Madam Mayor. Bree, I'm wondering what the conversations have been with ACHD about Vision Zero up to this point, and then a couple follow-up questions.
Sure. I think I had this in one of my slides, but ACHD has a complete streets policy, which is different, but it's still kind of in the name of incorporating all users in the street. And then they also have some enhanced equipment training and safety standards, acknowledging that incidents can sometimes happen around road construction and detours and things like that. But for this effort so far, we've had a staff level discussions with them about it and anticipate hopefully their collaboration and a future presentation to their commission as well to see how they might like to get involved.
Perfect. That's kind of what I was wondering. I think that there may be some support over there. And, we've had joint sessions with them before. It would be interesting to see how something like that could look after either we adopt it or before we adopt it and start having those conversations. Certainly that's, one of our big players, since our control is somewhat limited. I really appreciate Council President Clegg helping push this forward. I actually had the ability to present at a Vision Zero conference in New York City. It must have been 7 years ago, and it was right after a guy named James Kelly was hit on Federal Way, and it was a right turn on red situation where the driver, looked one direction, didn't expect to see somebody moving fast on a sidewalk on a bicycle the other direction, and he was hit and killed. Earlier that day, I'd actually helped him work on his bike over the Boise Bicycle Project. So that one was pretty personal. And like Councilmember Clegg said, preventable. And I think that that's really one of the key things here. And Council Pro Tem Sanchez often reminds me how much language matters. And it really is that idea of talking about things as a crash, something that we can prevent versus an accident, something that's not preventable. So I know Council President Clegg and I, we work really, really hard to avoid that use of the word accident, knowing that what are the factors at play and how can we really address those. So I couldn't be more excited about this, and I'm confident that this might be something that we could pursue with ACHD and some of our other agencies. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. I'd just like to invite other council members, if you have ideas about the kinds of things you'd like to see in the resolution that we pass, or the kinds of interests that you'd like to see on the task force, work with Bree, and we'll get something written, make sure that everyone has a good chance to preview it before it comes back to us, and then hopefully get that resolution on for approval at some near future date and move forward with the task force, if you all agree.
Madam Mayor? Yeah, thank you. I think that sounds like a great process for moving forward, Council President Clegg. And also, I think this is a great initiative. I was just curious where the idea originally stemmed from. Was it from you, Council President Clegg, or did it come from multiple sides? And yeah, I was just wondering where it stemmed from, but I appreciate this effort 100%.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Thompson,
Who's that?
Oh,
Sorry. I thought that was a council member asking a question. I did not recognize that as a council member's voice. I'm so sorry. Okay, go ahead. I thought that you were answering the question. No, okay, go ahead, Bree.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, the idea did originate abroad in the 90s, and adoption has kind of swept through the United States over the last couple decades. We had Vision Zero policy mentioned in our 2016 TAP, as I mentioned, but I think Council President, you might be able to speak to a little bit how we got here today.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
As Councilmember Halliburton stated, he's been interested in this for a long time. I've known about that in my work, in my day job. I've worked a lot on initiatives around this, and most recently was appointed to a Champions Institute at Transportation for America. And after having gone through that institute, really decided that it was time to ask if it was time for action here in the city toward this. So for me, it's been multifaceted, and it's been over many years.
Thank you.
All right, well, I
Thank you.
expect that Bree will be back in touch with next steps and an update. And thanks for joining us today. Hello, Maureen. Next
There.
up, we have Maureen Brewer with us to talk about homelessness and Our Path Home. This is a presentation that council leadership had asked that we bring to you, so it's here today. And Maureen currently is leading our housing team, but also has historically managed, as the city has provided staff to manage the Our Path Home Partnership, which is a group of 50 organizations with a shared vision of preventing and ultimately getting rid of homelessness in our community, but providing all the services that are parts of that. And so Maureen's here today to talk about that partnership, the goals that the partnership has, of course, the work that the city is doing with it, and is happy to take any questions, feedback, et cetera. But with that, Maureen, and she'll also provide an update on the positions as they relate to our work in this arena and housing in general. And so with that, Maureen, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Madam Mayor. Thanks for having me, and thanks for having me, Council. I know there has been a lot of recent interest in homelessness, so I'm glad to be here today to provide a partnership-wide update as before you in August. And as you all know, Our Path Home works with households that are experiencing what we call literal homelessness, so they're sleeping in emergency shelter or on the street, to get those households back into housing. And then we also work with households that are at imminent risk of experiencing homelessness. The main kind of tranches, if you will, of the partnership, sort of that scope of work that we have, encompasses homeless prevention, street outreach, emergency shelter, coordinated entry, which we call Our Path Home Connect, and I'll talk a little bit more about, and then our supportive housing programs. And then I would just add here, and the mayor made mention of this, that we do have a great many number of partner agencies. We have a pretty significant number of those, in fact. That said, many of those partner agencies are ancillary as opposed to kind of core or essential partners whose mission really is to serve those experiencing homelessness. So among those core providers or those essential providers and any partner agencies that are federally funded, they must accept referrals from coordinated entry, so from Our Path Home Connect, and they must use our data system, that Homeless Management Information System, HMIS. And then we enter into a series of partnership agreements with those agencies specifically. Madam Mayor and Council, you are likely well versed in these shared values, but I did just want to take a minute to kind of reiterate them here. First of all, the partnership is housing first oriented. We really strive to have every conversation that our client-facing staff has a problem-solving focus. So what barriers do we need to remove to get households back into a stable situation? And the conversation is not about preconditions for housing, but rather the conversation or conversations are about exiting households from homelessness as quickly as possible. The second sort of important kind of core value, if you will, is that the partnership is trauma informed. And that really comes down to being client-centered, meeting people where they are. The fact of the matter is that trauma results in physical changes to your brain, and homelessness in and of itself is a trauma experience. So when people are actively experiencing trauma, they don't necessarily respond in such a way that you or I might, or in such a way that you or I might find logical. So staff really try to adjust the services that we are delivering in such a way that clients can respond to those services and also engage in those. And then finally, this collaboration piece really can't be overstated. There's just too much to do, and it takes a committed professional staff across agencies to carry out what needs to be done. No one partner agency can do it alone, not unlike some of the other initiatives that have been before you today. And simply put, we're just better doing this work together. The presentation that I want to run through with you today is not data heavy. I can share some of our dashboards with you via memo or come back and provide some additional data. We are working on a public facing dashboard right now that would be kind of a simplified version of some of the data monitoring tools that we use, and that really kind of shows what our system performance looks like right now. Also, we will have our 2021 point in time count data in the next week or two. We're waiting on a couple of outstanding projects that need to be included in the point in time counts counterpart, which is called the HIC, the housing inventory chart. So that has to come alongside the point in time count. We're waiting on a couple of projects. That being said, in 2020, we had 695 households that newly entered the system through our Path Home Connect, and those households represent over 1,300 clients. Among those, 153 households were referred to a prioritized resource, so one of our supportive housing programs. I should also note here that while 695 households entered the system in 2020, the average number of households on the queue in 2020 was 835. So those are households that would have been carryover from the year before. But kind of that gap, if you will, between how many are on the queue and the number that the partnership has the capacity to refer to a supportive housing program kind of gives you the sense of the capacity of the system, the amount of demand, if you will, versus the amount of resources that we have to intervene. That said, kind of closing that gap, especially if we can harness this moment that we're in now, is really something that we can do if we're intentional and we're targeted. And then just kind of a note on the number of people active in the emergency shelter. We get a lot of questions about a precise number around those that are experiencing homelessness. We more or less know how many are in shelter each night, but the entries and exits in and out of our data system and in and out of shelter get a little bit tricky because this is a transient population. Their situations change, as they navigate those. For example, they might be able to pay for a few nights of a hotel, and then we'll see them again in shelter. So what we kind of try to do, or what we do try to do to arrive at that estimate around how many people are experiencing homelessness on a given night in Boise and in Ada County, is one, to look at that point in time count trend, two, look at the number of people that are active in emergency shelter over a period of time, and then three, how many households that we have on the Our Path Home Connect queue. And of course, again, that number fluctuates. It changes, quite frankly, daily. So what have we been up to, especially since I was last before you in August? With your assistance, we launched the Emergency Rental Assistance Program in partnership with the county and Boise City Ada County Housing Authorities. That program has been open since mid-February. As of last Thursday, the amount of assistance paid to date is $3.6 million to almost 800 households. So most of that is going to Boise residents. Well over 500 of those households are Boise residents. And this has really accelerated the number of households that we can serve through a homeless prevention lens. And it's also allowed us to make more than a one-time payment so that we can better stabilize families. And then in terms of our COVID-19 response, we've maintained the lease at the hotel. There have been no recent COVID positives, but we're continuing to serve medically fragile and families there. As of yesterday, we had 58 family members and 17 medically fragile individuals. And then, of course, continue to serve others in the congregate shelter setting or through our street outreach team if they're sleeping outside. And then finally, as it relates to COVID-19, we're really in the middle of a concerted effort to get folks vaccinated. We're using the Johnson & Johnson 1 dose, and then just leaning on our shelter staff, our outreach staff, and also using some ambassadors that are people experiencing homelessness to help message the safety efficacy of the vaccine. So I'm going to just run through quickly kind of where we are on each of these strategic initiatives, and then talk with you briefly about the community outreach plans that community engagement is taking on. You have seen a version of this slide before when I was before you in August, and certainly we see a pattern here in terms of new entries into the system. A lot of them are just that. That being said, we have a little bit of a dichotomy where on the one hand, we have people experiencing long-term, it may be episodic, but long-term homelessness with a group that's really could be considered new to the experience. The emergency rental assistance program is really helping here. I'm going to be curious to see kind of what that source of funds does to this trend. The last time I was here, or before you, I spoke with you all about, or we talked a bit about universal prevention versus targeted prevention. And universal prevention certainly has its own merits, but it doesn't necessarily prevent literal homelessness because people are resilient, right? They have resources that they can draw upon. So you don't necessarily see someone go from a lease immediately to shelter. Something happens in between. So although the emergency rental assistance program is a universal approach, there's also a significant amount of funds available. So I'm going to be curious to see its impact on our numbers experiencing homelessness. And then I would also just offer that while we have the emergency rental assistance program up and running for the time being, that still leaves a gap population. So we still don't have a solution necessarily for households that are not in a lease and are maybe in an informal housing situation. So what we're trying to work on is how we can get them onto a lease and then leverage the emergency rental assistance program. Obviously, the availability of units, the vacancy rate, those are challenging here. And then kind of the last thing I'll say as it relates to first-time homelessness and homelessness prevention is that I just want to acknowledge again that homelessness is something we can solve for in Boise, and it's critical that we do that now because there's a formula brewing, if you will, where in which A, Boise is growing, the Treasure Valley is growing, B, rents are increasing, C, vacancy is low. So this is the formula that we need to recognize and respond to right now and take some big steps forward to solve this now and inspire the community support that we need to do that. So how are we responding then? What big steps are we taking? The campaign to end family homelessness is one of those big steps forward. And I would point out here too that the system changes that we're making around this initiative will benefit all populations, including adult-only households. COVID delayed our planning timeline about 4 to 6 months, but the leadership cabinet first met in May. We've been doing a lot of education with them. Everyone really understands the why. Why is this important? They're getting more and more clear on the how, especially as what we've called our solutions team that's made up of 5 of our most essential providers has been meeting weekly for over a year now. And then net zero, I think we kind of walked through this last time, but it essentially means that the demand meets our capacity to serve folks. So we recognize and acknowledge that we'll never be able to prevent every episode of homelessness. This also means that we will still need shelter in some capacity, but that we can continue to evolve what shelter is and what services are provided there. So the campaign has 3 primary focuses: direct assistance to families through rental assistance and case management, what we're calling streamlined solutions. This is set to launch, this piece or focus area is set to launch July 1. It's pretty exciting because we have all of the major players at the table to include the Department of Health and Welfare, 211, and navigation. So for the first time, we will truly have one number to call for anyone in a housing crisis, you know, regardless of your eligibility or whether you're in a shelter already, whether you're in a lease, doubled up in a hotel motel. And then we're all kind of teaming up to have one triage team, one problem solving team. And then finally, in terms of boosting our housing options and really bringing housing first units to the market, we have a deep and acute understanding that we need units. We would love, as part of this campaign, to build a supportive housing project or even two. We can also leverage units that are already on the market. And then we have a smaller group of our leadership cabinet members that are working on a policy package that, you know, from a developer's perspective, would help involve them in the solution and help us move the market. Okay, this is another slide that you've basically seen before. This figure here was actually 7% in 2020. The take home really is that, like I said earlier, most clients that we add to the Our Path Home Connect queue do not receive a timely intervention from Our Path Home. But, and that's a capacity issue and a resource issue. But when Our Path Home does have the capacity to intervene, the intervention is effective. So really the big question before us is, how do we expand our capacity to do more? The Corporation for Supportive Housing is underway in their work to create with us just such a plan. And they are, I would say, the national expert in supportive housing. This work, this gaps analysis, financial model, and then coupled with an action plan should be wrapped up in the late spring, so in the next couple of months. And then we continue to work on really kind of pushing with and advocating with the Division of Medicaid for changes to the state's Medicaid plan so that we can bill for support services under that state plan and as a bundle. The earliest that this is likely to happen is July of next year. So we've kind of got one more gap year before we really can sort of hitch into a sustainable fund source for permanent supportive housing. And then lastly, just to kind of give you a sense or context of the populations that Our Path Home works with, most of the families with children on their queue qualify for or need what we call rapid rehousing. So that's kind of time limited up to 2 years of rental assistance and case management. On the other hand, most of the adult-only households qualify for or need permanent supportive housing. That being said, ideally, we'd want to start everyone in rapid rehousing because it's actually quite hard to predict how anyone experiencing homelessness will do once they're in housing. And a lot of folks really surprise you that they need that basic need met and then really can do quite well. So ideally, we would start everyone in rapid rehousing and then bridge those that need something more to PSH. Okay, a couple more slides, and then I'm happy to take any questions. These are, a couple of really sort of salient current issues of interest from residents in particular, and also from some media inquiries. So we've had some inquiries about the Martin settlement. The Our Path Home Executive Committee used a handful of threshold criteria, including that the proposed use of funds had to meet the terms of the settlement. So for example, applicants for these fund sources had to serve the population that we're talking about that are experiencing literal homelessness. So after it was determined whether those threshold criteria were met or not, the executive committee moved into a conversation about which partner agencies are essential, which partner agencies are therefore delivering an essential service and delivering that service right now. So that landed the committee to vote for putting the shelter piece towards interfaith, specifically around case management, staff salaries, nutrition, and transportation needs that shelter takes on. And then the supportive housing piece of the settlement went to the Housing Authority in their capacity as the partnership's PSH provider. And then lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't at least touch on all of the conversation and consternation maybe around Interfaith's proposed move. And I want to be clear that Our Path Home supports re-envisioning shelter, evolving shelter, and also supports ensuring that we can meet the demands of the night-by-night crisis, because we can't rehouse households fast enough right now. So although we do not want to overinvest in shelter, we also need a better solution for the night-by-night crisis, especially for our medically fragile and families with children. So on that point, I'll just leave you with the idea that shelter can and should continue to evolve. What we need today isn't necessarily, and hopefully isn't, what we're going to need in 2 years or 5 years. And it would certainly be Our Path Home's goal that we're nimble enough or agile enough to respond to the changing needs. And I think kind of a theme of what I'm hoping to convey to you is that if we're able to take advantage of this moment in time, we can start talking about doing things like converting shelter to housing, or using shelter as an access point to receive housing-focused services. COVID-19 really put into sharper focus that we have to thread this needle and both provide a crisis response for what's happening now and make deep investments in housing first and affordable, achievable housing for our most vulnerable. So because of, or at least in part, because of the renewed interest in homelessness within our community and a lot of the questions that we've been receiving that have been kind of hard to keep up with because frankly they're quite nuanced, community engagement has put together a plan to engage directly with the community and to share with them and educate them around our plans for homelessness, current efforts, future efforts, etc. And this is the calendar that our community engagement team has put together. If there's questions specifically about what this calendar of outreach looks like and what we're hoping to accomplish, kind of through each of these avenues, I believe that Lana is on this afternoon as well, so she can jump in and answer those with me. Questions that I can answer.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Maureen. It's good to see you. And thank you so much for the presentation.
You bet.
You'll have to forgive me. The work you do is so important and I need to get up to date on the terms. so the terms not organic for me yet, but they will be. And so you were talking towards the beginning of your talk about the two approaches, what was it, the universal? And so you were saying that on its face, that sounds like the logical way to go. But what I was gathering from that, and I just want to be sure I'm interpreting it correctly, are you saying that, if somebody's running into an issue with their housing, their first impulse isn't necessarily to go to a service, but perhaps to family or friends to maybe help them weather through that storm? Is that what you're referring to?
Madam Mayor Pro Tem Sanchez, kind of, yes. So what I'm referring to is that certainly there is a need for housing stability services. Putting that onus on the homeless services system is really difficult, especially considering all of the households that are already experiencing homelessness. So what I want to try to point out to Mayor and Council is that there are a lot of people, there are a lot of households experiencing housing insecurity. And what we want to do is try to connect them with what we would call mainstream resources before leaning on the homeless services system to provide those. So historically, we haven't spent a lot a lot of funds on homeless prevention, because there's something, and it's different for every household, but there's something that happens between me getting behind on my rent and that moment in time where I need access to a shelter tonight. And that's really where the homeless services system plugs in. Now, that being said, we have this opportunity before us right now through the Treasury funds that are supporting the emergency rental assistance program to really work further upstream and provide additional support and stabilize families and individuals further upstream.
Oh, thank you so much for expanding on that a little bit so that we can understand it a little bit better, Maureen. So a phone call I was just on right before I hopped onto our work session was really exciting with Lutheran Community Services of the Northwest, chatting with Shirley and I about that gap that you're talking about. It's, whether somebody needs help like within hours or maybe for the next 6 months, but catching them before they fall over the edge. And I'm really excited and hopeful to be talking some more with this organization. I've been discussing it for the past couple of years, just a more personal approach to this and having folks in our community, I know they're there, people who would very gladly open their homes to support folks who are needing that help before they fall over the edge into homelessness or housing insecurity. And I know for myself, I've learned so much thanks to you and other folks on our staff. And I remember talking about my own family and how my mom opened our home to folks who were needing that sort of help. And that it wasn't just about shelter, but it was about how to access other services. And it just so happened she worked for a community action program, so she knew about these things. So I'm really excited that we've made that connection with somebody in the community who is approaching it. From what I understand, from what Jessica Rurine told us today, I think they're going to start in earnest April 1st. So it's coming up. They've already got 6 host families who are willing to open their homes and support folks in our community. So I do believe we have folks who are totally tapping into what you just told us about. I'm so excited for us to see how we can support them in those efforts. But that's that Boise kindness that we know exists and that grace. And so I'm really excited to hear that that's part of our plan as well. Thank you, Maureen.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Maureen. One of the questions that I had that I just don't understand has to do with changes to state Medicaid policy. And I understand big picture that it has to do with how funds are characterized and how services are characterized, and it either opens or closes the door to a pretty significant amount of resources. My question is that something we need the legislature's help with? Is that a policy call for the governor's office and where will that decision be made?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Regent, thanks for asking that question. There's some work happening within a work group that's been convened by the Department of Health and Welfare. Ultimately, this will have to go before the legislature. The key for us is to get what's called a bundled act team, so assertive community treatment. And the key really is that those services are bundled rather than having to get reimbursed as a one-off, because a lot of the services provided by the support services team at New Path specifically are not billable right now under Medicaid the way it's currently set up without that bundled model. So it really kind of hamstrings our ability then to go forward with additional site-based permanent supportive housing projects, because we have to go separately secure support services funding in addition to rental assistance and vouchers. So the plan right now is for the Division of Medicaid at Health and Welfare. They're undergoing sort of a review of what the state's Medicaid plan looks like and are working on some revisions to that. And we've just really been advocating for, hey, listen, these are Medicaid eligible residents. Most of them are enrolled in Medicaid, but we're challenged by billing given the services that they need.
And that's why it's a July of next year, best case scenario thing, because those changes have to be made and then ratified somehow by the legislature.
Councilman Burbajan, that's correct. We're still under an active Medicaid plan.
Madam Mayor.
Councilman Thompson, I just said yes to the council president, but you didn't hear me because I just nodded. You'll be after Elaine. Go ahead.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. It's great to see you. Thank you for being here today. Really good information. So you'll probably not be surprised that I want more details. I always do.
No problem.
So you talked about in the beginning the number of people that are experiencing homelessness. I know that we're waiting for the analysis from the Corporation for Supportive Housing. Do we know where those people fit in terms of needs or vulnerabilities? Are they high need, low need? Is that going to be part of that report that we get from CSH?
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, the short answer is yes. We do have a very good idea on paper of what those households' needs are. And of course, the staff that are client facing and are working with those households and working with those individuals certainly have a really good idea too. We do an assessment of each individual's kind of vulnerabilities, if you will, and try to assign a score. And you can imagine there's room for error in that, right? It's interesting because, for example, a family that is newly entering homelessness might score a lot higher on some of those vulnerability indicators than somebody that's been experiencing homelessness for a long time, and for lack of a better term, is sort of used to it. So we try to pair that vulnerability assessment with the length of time that they've been experiencing homelessness, and that's how individuals and families are placed on the queue. And then there's specific eligibility criteria for permanent supportive housing versus rapid rehousing. By and large, our adult-only households, both on, through eligibility criteria and sort of the spirit of what PSH is, qualify or are eligible for PSH. And it's kind of the reverse for our families with children. A lot of them just need a few months of assistance, maybe up to several months of assistance to get back on their feet. Whereas a lot of the adult-only households are really high need. There's, long untreated mental health, maybe substance use, substance misuse, et cetera.
Thank you. I'll look forward to that because I think that will help us play into, develop a strategy for what's the highest priority, what we can help with the most early. And so one other question, I'm assuming that we're using our Path Home and coordinated entry to provide referrals to the ERAP program. Is that correct? How's that working?
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, yes and no. So our Path Home Connect and our coordinated entry system is very specifically focused on households that are already sleeping in shelter or on the street. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program is helping households that are on a lease specifically. There has been some updated guidance around that from the Treasury. So we're exploring if there is a possibility for us, if we're able to find a unit, get a household into a lease, and then make a referral to ERAP to carry that forward and really leverage that source instead of using, kind of the really precious resources that our Path Home otherwise has available.
Perfect. And then if I understood you correctly, I can't remember what you called it, triage was on that slide, but the new system that you're creating, you're trying to bring not just those already experiencing homelessness, but also those that are housing insecure into a common database. Was I hearing that correctly?
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, yes, by and large. So right now, we kind of have to put you in a box. Are you sleeping in an emergency shelter or on the street, or are you in a hotel, motel, or doubled up, or do you have a lease, or do you have a 3-day notice? So what we're trying to do, because we want to be trauma informed, is say, listen, if I'm a mom with kids that's in any kind of housing crisis, I don't want to have to call 4, 5, 6 places to figure out kind of where I am in line, which resource I'm eligible for. So what we want to do is streamline all of that. We were able to do it in 2017 with coordinated entry if you were experiencing literal homelessness. Now we're taking that a step further. Anybody experiencing a housing crisis, there will be one number to call. That triage team and problem-solving team will receive that call and then make a warm referral, a warm handoff to the appropriate place, so that we're doing that legwork as opposed to asking the household that's already experiencing trauma, that's already stressed, to try to navigate a system that's, quite frankly, pretty difficult to understand.
Super. And then one last, if I could, you talked about a lot of things that I know a little bit about, but not very much. My guess is, and I'm saying this now so that other council members can let me know if this is true. My guess is that other council members are in the same boat. And one of the things I'd like to do is follow this up with a really concerted education effort about the actual strategies that you're pursuing, so that we can then strategize about the things that we'd like to help support more or support better. Do you have the resources? I know you're stretched thin right now, so I hesitate to ask, but between you and the contractors that we already have on contract, like CSH, could you pull together an educational effort like that? Or would, because I'm asking because I think we could help if you need some help.
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, what I might suggest is that when or as the Corporation for Supportive Housing starts to put together their work product, that would be a really good time for either them or a combination of them and me to come back to you and say kind of, hey, here are the strategies. Here very specifically is the need, because they're working on the highest need. And then here's the action plan. So in my estimation, or from my kind of vantage point, that would be where mayor and city council will really have a concrete opportunity to make a very specific impact, given the recommendations that I'm expecting from that work product.
Thank you. That makes sense. I guess my only other reaction is that it would be nice to understand those strategies before we get the recommendation on what the strategies might be. So I guess I was suggesting that we just get education on what the strategies are. Then when those come, we don't have to have that discussion a second time. Is that, then it might help us work through those strategies. So we can work on it. But
Yeah, I'm going to say for point of time, because 2 more council members are in the queue, and we've got 5 minutes, that let's take that offline. I think we could work out something with Maureen and that presentation, have a longer time, but figure out in advance if there's already materials or something can be prepared easily to give background on all the pieces.
Thank you. And as you know, I'm very supportive of growing our supportive housing portfolio. So I look forward to working on it.
Were you next, or was Councilmember Thompson was next?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Maureen, I really appreciate this. It was very enlightening for me, and I'm looking forward to seeing it unfold come the July launch, as I believe you mentioned. And I was curious, 2 quick questions. I've heard many different terms used to describe the types of homelessness folks are experiencing. I didn't hear chronic. Does this include those that are in the most difficult spot of all?
Yep. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, it does. Chronic homelessness has a really specific and sort of technical definition associated with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The heart of that definition is that people have been experiencing homelessness for a long time, longer than 1 year, and/or they've been experiencing long-term episodic homelessness. So by and large, when I talk about PSH or permanent supportive housing, that is an intervention for folks that are experiencing chronic homelessness. The other piece of that kind of technical definition is that they also have a disability. And that kind of gets at that reference to their level of vulnerability and their level of need.
Thank you. And last question was, I saw some talk about Ada County at the beginning, but I couldn't tell, is this a Boise-centric policy or is it one that you're working with? Is it an Ada County-wide strategy? I wasn't sure which one.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, great question. Our Path Home serves county-wide. The City of Boise is the lead public agency. Catch serves as our Path Home Connect administrator, so our coordinated entry administrator. And then specifically with Ada County, we're partnering with them in 3 ways. One is on the campaign to end family homelessness. One is on the emergency rental assistance program. And then lastly, they have been supporting part of the cost of the support services at New Path Community Housing.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. So I guess my question, I've got CSH, their website pulled up right now, corporate supportive housing, because I wasn't super familiar, and I'll do a little bit more learning there. My question, I guess, revolves a little bit more around funding because it's just about April, and we're going to be talking so much about budget going forward here. And I know that we've got Martin case settlement. I know that we've got money that we've committed to addressing homelessness. I know that we probably have some federal aid that is going to help us in a variety of different areas. And kind of like Council President Clegg was saying with these different strategies, I would love to know how funding can really be used in the best way and what sort of way Boise really needs to be using its funds wisely and its partnerships wisely. Kind of asking ourselves, okay, well, this is how we used the funding last year. Did we go in the right direction? And now we've got a new set of circumstances with COVID and all these other things. How can we make sure that we're investing the right amount of money, more, less, or with partnerships? And I guess, so my question then would be, will this contract with CSH help us determine some of that funding, or how will we best kind of determine where we need to be investing dollars? And maybe that's too long of a question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I'm going to jump in just quickly with a quick answer and then ask Maureen to bring back more detail if I give something that's not accurate. I mean, as we see this, the recommendations will come from Corporation for Supportive Housing with the counts. And so then we know and can see the need that we have in the community. And then Maureen will bring back to council with Community Supportive Housing the recommendations and strategy. And from there, of course, our Path Home has funders as well. So it's not just all city funded, the county funds, there's so many funders. Campaign to End Family Homelessness, it has a goal of $8 million. And then of course we have federal dollars coming in. So Maureen and her team are looking at how we can best use new sources of funds like federal dollars for this, unusual opportunity, and then use the funding that they'll be asking us to approve as well. And so I imagine that after, with the next conversation, deeper conversation, then there's more clarity around budget as well with Treasury guidance, that we'll be able to have that conversation.
And then if Maureen doesn't have anything else, and this is just super fast, I know there's at least one city council member who's in the room tonight, and other folks who are there as well, who love hearing from people in the community about these issues and what their thoughts are. I'm sure that there would be some volunteers if there was a possibility of being part of some of those community discussions as well, even if it's just listening in. I know that we have to do those strategically, but I'll volunteer one or many of us if we need to be there.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to ask Maureen. Eric will be jumping on now, but Maureen, will you start as Eric's pulling up with an explanation of the positions, and then Eric can move through the IBC.
Absolutely, Madam Mayor, Council. So before you, in terms of the IBC, is a request really to move 3 new positions into housing and community development. The first of those positions would be a housing manager. Historically, housing and community development has been not necessarily narrowly focused, but largely focused on two housing and urban development programs. One is the Community Development Block Grant, and one is called HOME. And with, sort of this renewed interest in and urgency really in bringing affordable housing to the market, preserving affordable housing, increasing the affordable housing stock, what we want to be able to do is expand our capacity to implement those initiatives. So the first FTE would be for a housing manager to help us do that. The second position would be to add an FTE to the work I just walked you through with our Path Home. So we have a vacancy right now for the Our Path Home administrator, the role that I'm still filling. And then the plan would be to add a second Our Path Home coordinator to support implementation of our homelessness initiative specifically. And then the third FTE is a project manager, project coordinator. So housing and community development manages a lot of large scale housing and community projects. We've been doing that without a project manager, and by adding that capacity and that expertise, we'll be able to move through housing projects in particular in a more efficient manner and get units to the market faster.
Madam Mayor.
Yep, go ahead. Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you so much, Maureen. And I know that this is a huge body of work and that you've been handling so much, just being one person. And you kind of answered my question about your old position as the administrator for Our Path Home, because that was one of the questions I had as I was going through these new FTEs, because adding 3 FTEs is a pretty big deal mid-budget year, as you can imagine, and shifting those funds. Do you think that 2 people to now run Our Path Home is necessary? Or do you think that, getting that off of your plate into an administrator's plate might be enough?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, my dream really is to get additional support for Our Path Home. We've got some major initiatives underway, and have some work before us, including before council, in terms of engagement, outreach, education, and really moving that needle. So I would like to see both. There's things that don't get done because the administrator of Our Path Home, it has to be responsive to so many partner agencies, upwards of 50. And then there's work left on the table, right? So I would like to see both of those happen. And I think it will help us kind of make those leaps and bounds, A, and then B, kind of harness this moment that we find ourselves in where we have an incredible influx of dollars, and we absolutely want to put those dollars to their highest and best use, braid them in a way that makes the most sense so that we don't look back on this moment a year from now or 2 years from now and think, gosh, we missed it, right? So ideally, both of those would come in we would fill that vacancy and then bring in that coordinator to really increase our capacity.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And the other question I had was around the housing manager. And you had said that that was to expand the capacity. Expand the capacity for like what exactly? Is that to more quickly deploy affordable housing projects like the one at Franklin and Orchard? Is that to more quickly obtain new properties? What would that person kind of be charged with?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, both of those things, yes. The current grower housing program manager and then the HUD administrator would report to this housing manager, and that housing manager would really have the responsibility of staying up and sort of out of the weeds, making sure that we are evaluating new tools, researching creative solutions to housing, and then sort of expediting what it is that we're able to do through grower housing and the HUD funded programs to bring to increase our affordable housing stock, preserve our affordable housing stock. So that position would really have their eyes kind of above the detail and the running of the day-to-day business to make sure that we're staying on track and also measuring our performance.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you, Maureen. That helped me a lot understand these positions. My questions are probably for Eric, so maybe we're going to answer them, Eric. It sounds, we have a lot of money coming in through the American Rescue Plan. We already have some extra work with ERAP. We're building this streamlined system and coordinated entry. My question is, it looks like some of this money is one time. If we determine a couple of years down the road that maybe we're through this crisis, how will we reevaluate what the ongoing portfolio of work need is in this arena?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I might speak to the way this particular interim budget change is funded and kick it over to Maureen to respond to some of the one-time versus ongoing in relation to the housing funds. But I can speak to these requests that the funding sources that would be traded to support these housing positions were ongoing requests. So the three parks positions and the Grow Our Housing Reserve, which was funded on an annual basis as an ongoing source, eliminating that, wouldn't create much of an impact to our base in the general fund. I think I spoke in the IBC to about a $30,000 net impact, which we would build into the fiscal year 22 budget.
Thank you. I was misreading that 125,000 as a one-time and not spending it down over time. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
All right. I just want to say thanks to Maureen for the presentation on Our Path Home, but also to our professional staff across all departments that have worked with Maureen and the housing team to figure out how we can fund these positions or transfer positions from one place to another, recognizing the need right now.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
I move we approve the interim budget changes as presented for March 30th, 2021.
Second.
And if I could, just a quick comment.
Sure.
I think we've heard today that we do have a plan that will require some additional resources, especially in the immediate future, to manage the incoming American Rescue Plan funds and grow the capacity of Our Path Home on coordinated entry and streamlining. With that explanation, I'm supportive of moving these FTEs from parks into PDS for those purposes.
Thanks. Did I hear somebody? Was that Patrick?
You did. Yeah, to that, I would only add that it really sounds like there's real revenue and real money moving around, and there's just not enough bandwidth to confidently say we're going to make the right decisions and capture that and do the best we can. It sounds like we need these people to be able to take advantage of near-term financial opportunities that we might not have. And that, to me, is a really good basis to do an interim budget change, even though it's significant and that it's 3 different positions.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
I have to admit that I came into this presentation today extremely skeptical that we needed 3 new full-time positions, because I'm incredibly conservative on hiring new staff, because I know how disappointing it is when we have to let people go because we don't have the budget to support it, which is something that governments and nonprofits alike, I think, struggle with constantly. But Maureen's presentation today really, like Councilmember Bajent, gave me the comfort that this is really an opportunity for us. It's not that we're just trying to grow government. It's that we're really going to be able to take better advantage of some of the programs and really help people in our community who have been struggling very hard for a number of years. So I think that this will really make a difference for Boise families, for families who are experiencing homelessness and individuals, and really give us a better way to address our community needs. So I appreciate all of your help, Maureen, and I appreciate all of the work you've been doing. And thank you for bringing this to us today.
Roll call vote. Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Trail survey is Sarah on?
They can't hear me, sorry. Hi, Sarah.
There she is.
Go ahead.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon.
Go ahead, Sarah. You have your time.
All right. While I get this moving, Doug, do you want to go ahead and?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Just as Sarah's getting this ready to roll, just to set a little context very quickly on what we're presenting on today. As you're aware, Mayor and Council, we did a survey back in February with our trail users to really get a feel on, what we want to do from a management perspective moving forward. The context really that we're trying to share with all of our users now is that, we recognize that our trail system has changed over the 20 plus years that we have had this consortium of the Ridge to River system that is managed within the Parks and Recreation Department together. We recognize that the users' needs have changed. We recognize that the system itself overall has evolved and has changed. And so this is just really the beginning of looking at opportunities that we can really engage much more deeply with our users and continue to understand what those changes are and what changes they seek to see within the system. As we've done these surveys over time, we have noticed dramatic changes in the uses by our users. We certainly have experienced a significant increase, which you'd see in that first bullet point Sarah's going to cover. And we believe the pandemic has had a huge impact on that increase. But in our conversations, we really believe these are a lot of new users and a lot of users that maybe are using a lot more in the system. We don't believe they're going to subside and go away significantly when the pandemic decreases. So, we really need to prepare moving forward as we recognize that we have issues with dogs, that we have issues with bike and ped conflicts on the trails, that we really need to dig deep and talk to and engage with our users to really come up with a management strategy that is going to be something that we can be nimble with in moving into the future. And really today, that's what the survey is about in our presentation to you, Mayor and City Council members, is really to talk about some pilot programs we would like to roll out at some point in the month of April. And just to, and again, I know Sarah will cover it, but we did the survey in February, and then we actually did a follow-up survey with the results of the survey to our users, just to let them know what the results were, and then also gain feedback on what our thoughts were on the on the pilot program. So we feel like we have gathered a lot of great information. And so I'll turn it over to Sarah now to walk quickly through this. I know that we're kind of pressed for time, but we'll get to the punchlines here very quickly and then be open for any questions that council may have. So Sarah, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thanks, Doug. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Sarah Arkell, Boise Parks and Rec Open Space Division. I'm here today representing the Ridge to Rivers Partnership as the city leads that partnership, which includes 4 other agencies that own land in the foothill public agencies. So the survey that we're going to be covering, the feedback that we received through that survey was initiated through a virtual public meeting where over 500 people participated in learning about what Ridge to Rivers is and some of the challenges and opportunities that we have with the trail system moving forward. It was a long form survey, about 19 questions. It had great response. Over 4,400 folks participated. What we are trying to do is respond to changing use. I think we all, probably all those of us who participated in trail use over this last year, saw a pretty dramatic increase. We are in the last year looking at 3 times the amount of trail use and trail visits that we saw in 2019. So it's a good time to check in with users and make sure that we're still providing the service and providing them with the experience they're seeking. So the good news is most folks are very satisfied with the trail system. Most of the concerns and the dissatisfaction related to increased use, increased conflicts with different user groups, and trail damage. So as Doug mentioned, we did go out with a follow-up survey that just closed yesterday for a couple of items, and I'll address those as we get through them. But generally speaking, we got great feedback, great engagement, and we feel pretty confident about trying out some new strategies with the support of our users. So the folks who took our survey, this is the initial survey, since we have it's a larger pool and more time to go through the data. Mostly folks between the ages of 25 and 65, pretty well split between male and female, slight skew towards male users. 2/3 of those who took the survey visit the trail system at least once. And tracking with previous surveys, the majority of folks who took our survey are on foot. But I would like to note that mountain biking as a primary use is steadily increasing. So where 3 or 4 years ago, we were in the low 30%, that has continued to increase. And I think that follows anecdotal experiences and feedback that we've all been experiencing. So some of the information we received and feedback we received related to policy considerations, specifically trail damage and dogs. And I'd like to go through these briefly because the feedback we received is different than what we have gotten in the past. So we have asked these questions. In my time with the city, we asked them in 2015 and then again in 2018. And there's a significant difference in the responses that we're getting. Each time in 2015 and 2018, folks were not in favor of seeing changes with regard to dog policies on trails in the foothills. And that is not the case now. As you can see, almost 54% of our respondents want us to look at heavily used trails and determine better enforcement or education policies so that we're doing a better job managing dog use. So we're working right now with our partners to try and identify where those trails might be. We don't have any specific changes for you to consider at this point, but I do want to note that this is a different direction. Folks want us to manage dogs in a different way than they have in the past. So we are working to see if we can hire an animal enforcement officer that's specifically focused on the foothills and trailheads within the foothills. Right now, there's a handful of animal enforcement officers that are responsible for all parks and all trailheads. And we're getting the feedback here from residents that they'd like to see us focus more specifically on trails and trailheads. Same with trail damage. This is, again, a dramatic change. We have seen steady increase in concern about trail damage and steady increase in trail damage over the last 2-3 years as our use increases and we have to educate new users. But we're seeing an overwhelming support at almost 88% for enforcement. This is, again, something that we're going to need to investigate and figure out how we can do. We did a pilot trail closure program in 2017 and 2018 for Table Rock. It was marginally successful. We continue to be challenged to reach people prior to them getting in their car and getting to the trailhead. And then trail conditions can change hourly. So managing that trail closure was unsustainable. So we'll have to think through how we might respond to this feedback. Okay, and I'm Please feel free to speak up, Madam Mayor, council members, if you have any questions as I move through this, if it makes sense to address them in the moment. Otherwise, I will just continue to move forward and we'll address questions at the end.
Madam Mayor, one quick question before we change subject.
Yep.
Sure.
It looks like you just got through the feedback section of your presentation. And so I wondered if in addition to this survey, we have any pertinent feedback from our private partner landholders in the foothills. In other words, the people who are allowing our trails to cross their property, if they have anything to say that gives any context to what the public survey results said.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Bajent, if I understand you correctly, you're wondering if private property owners, if we've connected with them on some of these issues. And yes, we do weekly. Thankfully, due to well-written easements, we have the ability to manage the trails in a way that works with private property owners and also works with our users. So that will be an ongoing discussion. The bulk of the trail system is on BLM land. And so that when we start talking about policy considerations and changes in management policies, our federal partners are going to be really key in those discussions as well. Does that answer your question?
I think my question is longer and more involved than we have time for here. So you answered it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Councilmember Bajent. I'm happy to talk about that offline. So I am still discussing feedback we received from the survey. The first piece was just policies related to dogs and muddy trails or trail damage. The next piece we're going to be talking about is feedback related to management strategies. So we asked folks, and these are some questions we've asked them in the past as well. When we're adding new trails, do you want us to consider creating single-use trails? And again, we're seeing dramatic changes in the feedback. The support for single-use trails continues to grow. In 2018, when we asked this question, there was 66% support for this strategy, and now we're looking at 74% support. It's something we're going to need to consider and keep in our minds as we build new trails moving forward. Again, adding new trails in the future. Should we create directional trails? And in this sense, what we mean is one direction. So every user is traveling either clockwise or counterclockwise in a loop, or only uphill or only downhill. Again, we got overall support for this strategy. Obviously, that is going to depend on the trail itself and where it sits within the ecosystem of our trail system as to whether or not it is a useful strategy. But what we were trying to do was sort of put these options on the table for people to weigh in on. And so again, seeing support for a change in management strategy on new trails. So with that in mind, we asked our users, okay, but what about existing trails? Would you support the Ridge to Rivers Partnership implementing pilot management strategies? So something that's short-term that we can try out on selected trails with the goal of reducing user conflict and improving user experience. A lot of the feedback that we get is there's blind corners throughout the trail system. And so it's hard for me as a user to know if I'm going to be safe. There's a mountain biker or an equestrian coming around the trail. We also have seen a lot of concern about increased use. So we asked these folks who took our survey, do you want us to try something different, something we've never done before? And overwhelmingly, the answer was yes. 83% of the folks who took the survey, and they are a self-selecting group of trail users, want us to try something different for a short period of time. So this was a fairly rich data set, so I have summarized it the best that I can within this presentation. So there's clearly going to be a lot of opportunity for follow-up discussion, and I'm happy to do that. But here's a high-level view of the management strategy feedback that we received, and then I'll get into specifics per trail in the next following slides. Our team came up with a handful of suggested areas where we may try pilot strategies. This was based on our knowledge of the system, our knowledge of the trail's use, and the type of user experience people are looking for. And we asked folks to rank their priorities. Hulls Gulch Trail was the first priority trail in the mind of our users for a pilot management strategy. Polecat, Bucktail, and Around the Mountain were 2, 3, and 4 respectively. When we asked them the type of management strategy we should implement in a pilot program on these trails, feedback was a bit mixed, which makes sense because the folks who are taking this survey are users, not necessarily managers, right? We asked them, would you like us to try an even versus odd day strategy or that directional trail strategy? And in some cases, we needed a little bit more information and a little bit more clarity as to that feedback. And so that's why we went back out with a follow-up survey. It had 3 questions. The goal was really for clarification on Lower Hulls Gulch and Bucktail specifically. And then a 3rd question just related to user experience and should the city be taking a more of a leadership role in finding technical mountain bike opportunities in the foothills. And so that was the follow-up survey that closed yesterday, and we received over 2,000 responses. So we're getting good engagement. That's the good news. People want to participate. So based on all that feedback, based on the initial survey and the follow-up survey and what we can implement on the ground, we have recommendations that we're bringing to you for pilot programs on these trails. The first one I'd like to go over is Lower Hulls Gulch. This one is probably the most complicated, which was why we went back out for clarity on feedback. In this pilot program between April and November, and in partnership with community engagement, obviously there'd need to be a robust education and outreach effort to help folks understand that on even days of the month, Lower Hulls Gulch Trail would be closed to downhill mountain bike use, open to all other uses. And on odd days of the month, Lower Hulls Gulch Trail would be downhill bike only. So the feedback on this strategy was close enough. It's over a majority of folks who want to see us implement this and try it out. We asked this question basically again in the survey and got very consistent results. So here's just a map for those of you who need some orientation. The Foothills Learning Center is, let's see if you can see my, right here. Hopefully you can see my cursor. In yellow is Lower Hulls Gulch Trail. Again, it'd be closed to downhill mountain bike use on even days of the month and only downhill mountain bike use on odd days of the month. There's, as you can see, a lot of other trail opportunities in the area. And this is in the feedback that we received from folks, both anecdotally in the comments and also in the quantitative data. This solution is the best to serve all the people who want to enjoy this trail. It has some technical features on it that are unique to the system that mountain bikers really want to experience. And it's close in. There's a lot of folks who want to hike it with their families and not be concerned about downhill mountain bike use. So we feel this is the best strategy for a pilot program. Moving on to Polecat Loop Trail, which was the 2nd priority. Because of its configuration in our trail ecosystem, we can provide a directional experience, so a one-way loop. As you can see in yellow, that's Polecat Loop. It would be a counterclockwise direction with an out and back opportunity preserved for folks who don't want that longer trail for that first half mile. Again, supported by the community with a majority of users. Around the Mountain Trail, same strategy. It is a loop, so it would be all users traveling counterclockwise. We have been working with Bogus Basin because this trail is within their area of ownership. We've been working with Bogus Basin. They are supportive of this strategy and have offered to pay for the signage and assist with implementation. And finally, Bucktail Trail. This one was a little bit more complicated. It was one we went out and asked for clarity about in that 2nd survey. We had originally asked folks if they would like to separate use on Bucktail Trail and have one trail for downhill mountain bikers, and another for uphill folks, equestrians, and foot traffic? The answer was yes. We wanted, when we went back into the field to see what might be a possibility, it became clear that the only option would be to create a new trail for foot traffic only and keep the existing bucktail trail for downhill mountain biking. So that was why we went out and asked for clarity on that trail. And we got, I think, let me just find my notes here, I think it was 84% support for that strategy. So in this map, you can see the existing bucktail trail in yellow, and then the new trail in dashed green. So the way we are envisioning implementing this pilot strategy would be uphill mountain bikers will use Central Ridge. All users can use Central Ridge. Downhill mountain bikers will be separated onto bucktail trail, where the new trail can be foot traffic coming down or going up. So this is the only pilot management strategy where we would have a permanent change. We would have a new trail on the system, but it would, we can always revisit how we manage that new trail based on the feedback that we received during the pilot program timeframe. So a few final thoughts, and then I'll open it up for questions, and thank you for your patience tonight. Hopefully I did not move too quickly through this information. We are in the process of working with community engagement right now on a communications plan, signage, and a continued engagement plan and exit strategy should we need it. This is all very new to us, to the partners, and to our users. We are highly acutely aware of that. We want to make sure we're as clear as possible with people in terms of guidance, that we are taking an educational approach and continuing to be open to additional feedback so that we can determine if the pilot program is being successful at different points in its implementation. We did, we plan to work with our trail rangers. We have 15 of them right now. They're folks that are high-level volunteers. They wear a jersey, they go out onto the trails, and they act as ambassadors, not just for a Happy Trails campaign, other etiquette issues, navigation. They're out on the trail offering themselves as a resource. They have no enforcement authority. So we'll be working with them to gather feedback about the effectiveness of the program. We're also looking at follow-up short surveys throughout the course of the implementation interval so that we're getting good feedback from our users as well. I do anticipate we'll get a lot of feedback. So trying to make sure that we have the tools in place to identify decision points. One new trail of note that I just wanted to highlight real quickly because it's something that received a ton of support. The city was approached by the North End neighborhood and some community members about a year ago, looking for ways to increase neighborhood accessibility into Military Reserve, and specifically creating a trail connection into Union Street from Military Reserve off of Elephant Rock Loop, which would require coordination with the Veterans Association. It got high support. The Veterans Administration and the campus folks there support this as well. So that's something you can anticipate seeing more about. St. Luke's has generously donated $12,000 for construction of this trail. And clearly it's something that folks want to see happen. And then my final thought about the response, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing steady increase in mountain bike use as a primary mode of recreational experience. And I think we've got some opportunities based on this feedback. 89% of the folks who took the second survey want us to find opportunities to improve and increase directional trails with technical features for mountain bikers. That's going to be a lift based on the patchwork of ownership. But I think from my perspective, sitting, as a land manager and a recreational manager, Boise has become a outdoor tourist destination due to our wonderful trail system and highly accessible open space and wildlife. And some of the changes that we're experiencing are very similar in other parts of the country, where folks are showing up to the area just to experience their trails. And so as we continue to find ways to better manage the system due to increased use, we need to be thinking, I need to be thinking, and our partners need to be thinking about how we can continue to provide excellent service to our users. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions about the pilot programming or any of the feedback that we received.
Sarah, we've got 5 minutes max because we have a very important and timely legal issue that we have to discuss in executive session. So it looks like Holly wants to ask a question. We'll go ahead with that. Then I'm going to ask people to give feedback. The piece that Sarah just talked about is something that they'll come back to us with, so we don't need to belabor that piece right now, which I find very important, but we don't need to belabor it now. So I'm going to ask if there are questions on the pilot projects in particular, and then if there's feedback that can be shared with Sarah through Amanda by early next week. Go ahead, Holly.
Thank
and
you,
then I'm going to ask everybody else to give feedback through Amanda.
Thank you. Sarah, thank you for the presentation. It was great seeing the results. We had talked, I think maybe a couple of years ago now, about some mountain bike teams, and it's mountain bike team season again, who had reached out to me asking for a coordinated calendar. Has anyone, have they kind of started coordinating that? It seems like that could be a really great solution to get folks not riding on top of each other.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, thank you for bringing that up. We had a couple of really good conversations with the mountain biking teams, and it was waylaid by COVID. And I think that's something we need to pick back up. We ran into some challenges with a community shared calendar. I think that there's some solutions just with our existing social media platforms, wherein we need to just be asking these folks to post where they're going to be and when, because sometimes it changes based on trail conditions. So thank you for bringing that up. That's something we need to pick back up and find a good solution for.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to having a connection between the Military Reserve and Union, because that's in our neck of the woods.
Thank you, Sarah and Doug.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I move that we go into executive session, personnel, land acquisition records exempt from public disclosure, pending and probable litigation, communication with risk management regarding pending and probable claims, labor contract, Idaho Code 742061 1B, C, D, F, I, and J.
Second.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
And we get to eat while we do this, folks.